Pandemic and some encouraging news that could reshape politics this fall. A vaccine for COVID is coming sooner than you think. That's what Health and Human Services Secretary Alex Azar told us. This is an exclusive interview that we did while socially distancing outside under a couple of tents and a rain cloud. Mr. Secretary, thanks for the time.
Glad to be here.
I want to ask about vaccines. There's a vaccine by Moderna that's entering phase 3 clinical trial. That's pretty significant. I'm curious how soon you think a vaccine might be available.
Well, you're right. It's historic. The Moderna vaccine, which was originally invented out of NIH, entered phase 3 clinical trials. That's the final dispositive phase just 4 months after phase 1. That's not happened before in human history as far as we can tell in the developed world. So an incredible achievement. And now Pfizer has also launched phase 3 with their vaccine. So that's 2 of the 5 vaccines that we have announced contracts, investments, or partnerships with as part of the President's Operation Warp Speed are already now in the final stages of trials. So the way this will work is they have to get an initial vaccine, and then about 3 to 4 weeks later, people will get the second vaccine, and then we have to collect data to see if the vaccine is proving, in those who got the vaccine, is proving to give them protection. So it will be a couple of months at least until we start seeing some data coming in on these, but we're not waiting.
Could a vaccine be available this year?
Yes, yes. It is very credible that we could have the high tens of millions of doses of FDA authorized or approved vaccine this year.
There's been a lot of talk about how much a vaccine would cost. The U.S. is spending a lot of money with Operation Warp Speed to give to these companies. Should the vaccine be free to American citizens?
So with many of these contracts, we actually will own the vaccine, and as the owner of it, we'll be giving it to the American people for free. So for instance, the terms of the Pfizer contract provide that we will actually acquire 100 million doses of vaccine that will be given to the American people. We continue to negotiate with the different vaccine companies, contractual provisions, but we have made the commitment that the COVID vaccine will either be free or certainly affordable for all Americans. Their cost will not be a barrier to any American having access to an approved COVID vaccine.
I want to talk about contact tracing for a moment. The CDC says it's vital to really slowing the spread, stopping the spread. But there are states like Texas, like Florida, like Massachusetts that just are understaffed and unprepared when it comes to that. What are these states doing wrong?
Well, they're not doing something wrong, but what it is, when you have this level of community spread, when you're having 17% positivity on the testing that you are doing, the traditional tools of contact tracing are not really what's going to get this under control at this point. What we need now are what we call community mitigation efforts. That's why it is so critical now that we wear our face coverings, that we practice social distancing, that we shut the bars down, which are settings where we know we're just not going to be socially distant or wearing face coverings. If we take these measures, we see an impact. We've seen this in Phoenix. Simply face coverings plus shutting the bars down has turned the tide in Phoenix, and we're seeing signs of that here in Texas.
Mr. Secretary, I want to talk about a big story here in Texas. There's a worldwide race for the vaccine. I'm curious about the Chinese consulate in Houston. Were they trying to steal vaccine research from institutions? Is that why the consulate was closed down there?
I don't know about that. I'd have to refer you to Secretary Pompeo. Obviously, we're very concerned about other countries attempting either to steal or to sabotage the vaccine and other Operation Warp Speed efforts. I personally don't know about the connection to the consulate issues, and I don't want to make any statements regarding any particular country that might be involved.
Mr. Secretary, thanks for the time.
Great, thanks. Good to be with you.